All right. Well, with that, I am delighted to turn over the microphone to my colleague Alex Villalobos to kick us off with conversations about the General Hospital and West Campus feasibility study. So, Alex.
Hi, good morning, fellow HICP members and everyone joining us this morning. Thank you, and thank you for sharing your time and for this opportunity for me to provide an update on the progress of our study. As we have shared, the study continues, has made great progress and exciting developments, and continues to engage as we continue to engage with community leaders as we move forward into the RFP phase, having worked closely with the community to see it come to fruition. So thank you so much for being here and allowing me. I would like to now ask Doug Cohen with the LA County Department of Workforce Development, Aging and Community Services to bring us an update on the RFP process as it is related to this study. Doug.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, HICP. Thank you, Heather and Rosa, for the opportunity to provide the community this update on the RFP process. So the RFP process, first I'm going to back up. Just so everybody is acquainted, the request for proposal is the process by which a developer would eventually be selected for the development of the project site. The feasibility study that Alex just mentioned is a very significant process that is underway, has been underway. You're familiar with that. And at the conclusion of that process, the board is initiating the actual process to go forward with the development, and the first step of that would be to select a developer. And the selection of the developer is a competitive process. The RFP is what establishes that competitive process, and so it's a pretty significant component of delivering the project that we're all here to talk about. In the discussions that we've had to date, several questions have started to formulate, and one of them right off the bat here is, how much opportunity will HICP and related groups such as the CESC and generally the community have to shape the RFP? The input that's been going forward over the last many months as part of the feasibility assessment is integral to the actual basis upon which the requirements of the RFP for the developers to respond to are going to be based in that. So the input that you've been providing all along is going to be built into the requirements in the RFP. The RFP itself, though, will be a public document, and upon the actual posting of the RFP, obviously HICP will have a full access to it. Currently, what we're doing, though, is the RFP process. We are not actually initiated the consultants that will assist us in creating the drafting of the RFP. And when we launch that process in the next couple of weeks, one of the things that we're going to be incorporating is a way to bring about HICP or related community input into the actual selection process. And so what we're moving from is not just the requirements that the developers will have to respond to, but also the selection process. Once those developers have put together their proposals to be assessed and to be evaluated, so that one proposer would be selected over the others in a competitive environment, we're looking at ways for HICP or related community input members to be part of that selection process. Another area of questions that we've encountered are about just the local hiring goals, and absolutely local and targeted hiring goals will be a requirement of the RFP. This is an example of the requirements that we have the ability to build into the RFP. And again, when we talk about requirements, these are elements that the developers who wish to be selected for this, who are competing for the selection, they have to respond to this. It's not an alternative element for their proposal to respond to. They have to respond to these requirements. Will there be only one developer is an area of discussion that oftentimes comes up. This is a public-private partnership. And it is not, that differs from a public works process. In a public-private partnership, we have the ability to structure the overall development in a way that can obligate a single entity. And there's a great value to the county and to the public in doing so. There are a series of promises made, and those promises can be enforced to a single entity. Now, that single entity with respect to this development site is obviously going to be a massive concern. There would be most likely in this type of structure, you'll have subordinate agreements. In other words, additional subcontracted developers that might participate in the affordable housing component, that might separately a subcontracted developer would be engaged in the commercial element. And we can advance to the next slide if you'd like. Thank you, Heather. In going down the list of questions that we have encountered from recent meetings, one of the questions is about the feasibility study, but most importantly, the RFP. And we oftentimes, when we talk about the discussion of, can it be prescriptive? And what we're talking about there is where we design, how much can we design this and then just ask some developer to come up and compete for the design. And to some degree, one of the values of a public-private partnership is you're actually having the private sector compete with their cost efficiencies in both design, which is quality, and also the cost of construction, and quite frankly, their cost of debt. What we're hoping to do is to have the private sector compete in such a way where we leverage all of those three efficiencies so that we unlock the value of our public sector assets in a way that would not be available to us to leverage if it was a public works project. So in terms of being prescriptive, what we're really looking to do is to allow enough latitude, build in the requirements that we need, but build in enough latitude so that the private sector in a competitive environment is competing to essentially leverage their efficiencies in three significant areas: quality, the cost of construction, which actually affects the revenue streams available to the county, and then also the timeline. What level of obligations and commitments in the shortest period of time will they deliver the various significant phases of the development? So that's what we're hoping to do in a public-private partnership type of RFP. Can we leverage creativity and cost efficiency while upholding the amount of housing? The RFP is going to have a significant component built around a very aggressive affordable housing component. So when I say aggressive, this is an area where we're putting into the RFP a significant requirement that the developers respond to as great an amount of affordability and essentially the most amount of units at the least amount of rent. And that is an area that we are going to focus on in the creation of, in drafting of the RFP. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide if you'd like. Thank you.
Before we do that, Doug, we have a couple questions in the chat that are really responsive about the RFP itself.
Sure.
We have a question from Pamela asking, will the RFP state all of the requirements of the county's community benefit policy? It would be great for competing developers not just to meet, but to exceed the community benefits requirements in their proposals.
So there's a significant component, great question. So there's a significant component, let me back up. In the RFP process, the developers are going to have to respond to various areas in their proposals. One of those areas will be a community benefits assessment. They're going to have components within that. That's almost an umbrella element. And it's essentially specifically addressing the community input. And so what's going to happen is when you talk about meet or exceeds, this is where the developers will have an entire section in which they know they are being evaluated in a competitive environment upon just that, how well they can exceed the community benefits assessment area. So in terms of community benefit, project labor agreements, things of this nature, the actual outreach plan that would be post-developer selection, maintaining, in other words, the promises that they've made. These are all areas that would be in a single area of evaluation and assessment as part of the RFP process.
Thank you. Another question here. How can this project tap into the biotech industry? That is, how does the building upgrade need to be designed to accommodate this type of industry as a way of paying for the affordable housing portion of the project?
Wow, great question. So, we're in the shadow of a biotech corridor that was identified years back, plenty of studies and support, the Whiteside area. You've got a great local company. It's one of them. It's actually a global leader in plasma development, Grifols. Homegrown company right there in the shadows of this site. And so this is absolutely an area where we have the site itself, which is the hospital and which is the West Campus. And we're looking at, providing a very aggressive affordable housing component within that, some commercial. However, we also are recognizing that we're in the shadow of what is essentially a fantastic corridor for bioscience. So the elements within the RFP will build into that. And again, these aren't requirements, but these are going to be areas in which the developers are going to compete for how well they can tie in elements that are available to the surrounding areas. We've got the possibility of an opportunity zones. And how does that affect? And how does that affect it become a magnet or the EIFDs? How does that affect it become a magnet that the developers for the hospital and West Campus can include in their RFP? The idea is for the developers to provide in their response something that is of greater latitude than just simply providing affordable housing within the footprint. We recognize that we have to build a regional economic development opportunity wherever possible, and we will build that into the RFP as a platform for the developers to respond to.
What a perfect segue to our next question, which is there a target related to affordable housing? And they say, and the question relates to like numbers, percentages. I'm not sure if that means numbers of units or percentages of units or percentages of affordability, but there's just a question, I guess, in general is like, are there targets that will be specific in the RFP related to affordable housing?
So, the target is, the target, I don't want to say yes to the word target, okay? The developers will have, we will be providing through exhibits that are a component to the RFP, scenarios that are setting the expectations that the county has. The county will certainly be stating what its expectations are for not, again, just the units of affordable housing, but again, the most amount of affordable units at the lowest rent. The developers will be competing on how they're going to deliver that. So not only will they be competing on the number of units and the number of units at the lowest rent, but on a believable scenario about how they're going to deliver on those promises.
Thank you. Yes, there was a follow-on question related to kind of a comment question related to the use of Section 8 vouchers for people who would be living in the affordable housing units, mentioning, of course, that there's a limitation that Section 8 is only available to documented residents. So is there something that might be done through this process to to subsidize, the affordable units even, so that to create a greater opportunity for undocumented individuals to occupy the units.
Well, so one of the areas of drafting the RFP in drafting the RFP, we'll be bringing in our county partners. And one of the county partners that we'll be working closely with in drafting the RFP to address this question is our partners over at the County Development Authority, which is the Los Angeles County Development Authority, is the housing authority. And they would be opining and providing areas of expertise on the use of vouchers.
Sounds good. There was also a question from Vivian. I think it relates to actually applications for tenancy to the facility, but saying, is there a process for people who do not qualify for affordable housing who are unable to find single units or one bedrooms in the area? So I don't know that we're at that stage yet of understanding, how people might apply for, or what the application process, or like who would be eligible to become tenants of the new facility. I don't know if
Right,
you
and
have.
this is an area where we again defer to our county partners.
Sounds right. Okay, let's see if there's any additional questions before we move on. There's a question: will the lowest rental cost units exclude parking or include parking? Is there a sense of how parking might be allocated out through the as it pertains to housing units plus parking?
Well, a great question, but it's actually a bigger question than just that. How this entire site and the significant areas of this entire site are going to be parked is part of an area of assessment. So, one of the things that we're looking at in current projects, not just this project, is, can we rely on last mile e-mobility elements? And yet at the other end of the spectrum on that conversation, do we really want to burden affordable units with something that's less than a direct access to the units? So we would love, the conversations are being built into projects currently that bring in that last mile of mobility. But at the end of the day, which creates a greater element of green spaces and walking paths. But at the end of the day, we've got to be able to provide direct access to these units.
And I know parking is bigger than just the housing complications as well, because of course there'll be multiple uses on the site. As someone who works at the campus already, we know that there's parking challenges for staff who are currently at the medical center. So we know that parking is always a critical concern. And of course, we want to encourage green transportation modes. But at the end of the day, a lot of people still have cars that we need to take care of too. So I think that takes care of the questions in the chat thus far. So Doug, I'll let you continue forward with your presentation.
Okay, let's see. I think we're on. Okay, so thank you, Heather. Questions have been raised about the opportunity for community engagement. You know what, Heather, I'm going to ask you, can you advance to the very next slide in answering this question? So there's 3 points of contact where we're going to be bringing in community input into this process, and each one's significant. We're drafting the RFP. Now, drafting the RFP does not mean posting the RFP. Drafting the RFP means we draft the RFP and then we sit back and we sit amongst ourselves here in the county and we take a look at what do we have and how do we refine this before we post it. And at that point where we're refining it, that's where we can bring in HICP or community input into that process. So we'll draft the RFP, basically get everything formatted, and then we can take a step back. The district office has been fantastic supporter of the timelines associated with this. And we're going to be able to fine tune the draft prior to posting with the community input. That's significant. The second part, which is also something that I really needs to be appreciated. It's because it hasn't been part of other public-private partnership offerings. Is once the posting of the RFP occurs, the developers will then start to build their responses. Those responses will have a due date, and when that due date comes in and the responses are checked in, and we have the eligible members of the proposer groups being selected for actual evaluation and selection, in the evaluation process, as I had mentioned just previously, we're going to be bringing in a subcomponent of HICP to provide a recommendation to the actual evaluation panel on the community benefits assessment. So let me back up here. Community benefits assessment is the umbrella area, it's the umbrella section of the entire RFP response by all the developers. And in that community benefits assessment, we'll have a subcommittee, a panel of that's basically provided by HICP, and they will be reviewing that CBA, and they will be providing a recommendation to the actual evaluation panel that votes on and selects the developer. So that recommendation is going to be, that's a significant area of input that the HICP is going to have during the selection of the developer. And that's something that, quite frankly, we haven't done that before. The third area is post-selection. And this is where I say a developer is selected on their promises. And then our job is to enforce the capacity to make them maintain their promises. One of the key areas, that's one of the very first things out of the box, post-selection, you've selected the developer now, is their outreach plan, their outreach plan, which leads to the project description, which is the actual application for the project that they're trying to get permits to build. So there's a component here where they actually, it's a document. Their outreach plan is how the developer is going to be engaging with the community to build upon the community input that the developer built into their promise of how they were going to actually develop the site. HICP will be able to be part of that outreach plan. And we're developing the role for HICP, or a sub-panel of how that role can act, the roles and responsibilities in that area. So basically in three significant areas: during the refinement of the draft of the RFP, prior to the posting of the actual RFP process, we'll have HICP or a sub-panel involved in the fine-tuning. We'll then have HICP or a sub-panel part of a recommendation of a significant part of the developer's response, which is the community benefits assessment. And then post-developer selection, we'll have a sub-panel of HICP as part of the developer's outreach plan. And then I see that there's a last question here. In future phases, so breaking down those three areas. When we're finalizing the RFP, we're actually going to have site walks, is what you can think of it. We call it industry days, but we want to be able to, this is before the RFP is finalized. We're actually going to have an opportunity for the developer community to start to have discussions about this. And it would be great for HICP or a sub-panel to be part of a Q&A. So again, establishing that Q&A component, that platform for not just a meet and greet, but quite frankly, a pretty well-defined series of questions and answers from the development community will give HICP the capacity to set the tone for community outreach.
Great, thank you so much, Doug. So let's see. We have a question here from Pam. Can the RFP consider post-developer development agreements, like local hire for permanent positions? So I guess the idea is post the construction phase. I'm interpreting from you, Pam, if you want to ask your question directly. But we're running into this with the Restorative Care Village too right now, where it's like there was a local and targeted hire component in the construction phase, but then in the operations phase, will there be local hire opportunities, or is that specified at all in the RFP process, or is that a future process?
So I don't know if you're waiting for Pam to ask the question directly, or you want me to just.
Nope, I think she said I got it. So
yeah,
okay.
She got it, Doug. But yeah, just adding my voice here. Just exactly for the reasons that Heather shared. You know, I think it was perhaps not a full missed opportunity with the restorative care village, but I think this partnership did so much intentional work to get a best effort for restorative care village. And so I wonder if we need to start thinking about this process just as early as this process when we think about permanent job opportunities.
Yeah, so I actually work for WEDAX, okay, which that's not just economic development, but it's also workforce development. And a key area of discussions that we're having is, and I'm a real advocate for this, is how we can go beyond just preferences, but actually into carve outs, specific mandates, if you will. And this has to do with legitimately with the operations and maintenance, which is post delivery. So you've got construction jobs. That's great. But you've got the operations and maintenance of a completed project. And it's in the operations and maintenance where I believe we're going to find some a real opportunity to engage in the workforce development programs. So the more we can build in, the answer to your question is yes. We're looking at building in a programmatic side wherever it is possible. And I believe where we're going to find that possibility is in the operations and maintenance side. And I'll go one more step. A developer typically, and this is our job on the RFP, we can go to this side, we can go to this extent. Public-private partnerships are design, build, and then somebody's going to own it, the operations and the maintenance. And there's literally a term, DBOOM. And so what we're actually talking about is building into the RFP process structure of the deal that would include the operations and maintenance. And it's in the operations and maintenance that I think your question is going to actually get the answer yes that we hope to have. I believe that's where the programmatic side is going to be able to be unveiled.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I think that might be everything as it pertains to RFP questions. So we are a little bit past time, but I'm going to ask my colleague Alex to walk us through the next few slides so we can wrap up in the next few minutes. Alex, take it away. And thank you so much, Doug, for being with us today. And we expect to see your smiling face back with us many times in the future. Very exciting updates and very exciting opportunities for HICP's participation in a going forward role.
Thank you.
Alex.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. And Doug, thank you. It's great to know that there's such comprehensive efforts, even moving beyond the study and RFP process. Thank you for that. So now let's move on. Let's see, I'm sure you're all familiar with this slide on the General Hospital Feasibility Study process. So we are getting closer and closer to the end of the study phase of the project. So you can see we are here in the process just before our study is presented to the Board of Supervisors. And as Doug just shared, there are still many exciting opportunities ahead, and we're eager to finalize the study so that we can move forward into the next phases. And as Doug reassured all of us that there's a comprehensive effort into moving forward with this process that is involving the community's interests in mind. So we'd like to share with you a preview of the elements of the study report that will be submitted to the Board of Supervisors at the end of the month, at the end of this month, as well as responses to some of the questions asked at some of our engagements. So what is this? What does the study look like? What will it include? So the study will include the board motion and the healthy village concept, as well as the study process, which includes community input and technical analysis, the existing conditions of the facilities and the campus, and the market research as it relates to the project, the reuse framework, including key considerations from the community and the county, and the identified potential funding sources. What, if anything, the next question is that we received is, what, if anything, is closed or lost for community influence once the feasibility study closes? Well, the community's priorities will be captured in this feasibility study. So completing the study allows the project to move to the next phase one step closer to providing needed community benefits and resources. The process is ongoing with opportunities for community engagement and participation along the way, including the next RFP phase. What elements of the study, such as market analysis, will be shared with the community? So when the study is provided, I like to hone to these direct answers so we can share these and be on the same page with all of them. So I'll just go through them. When the study is provided with the Board of Supervisors, it becomes a public document, and therefore all components of the study, including the market analysis, will be available to the community. That's very reassuring. It's great to know that we'll have all that available. Who ultimately decides what goes into the feasibility study? The community has provided input and that will be documented in the study. Community partners have also provided considerations that need to be addressed. Ultimately, the supervisor's office and the CEO will compile the final document that is presented to the board. Next question was, how can community visibly see their input in being taken into account? Will there be an addendum of community priorities? Well, the study will have a dedicated summary section and comprehensive appendix outlining the community engagement process and the uplifted community priorities and needs. So this has been vital through the process, is to make sure that not only do we have a platform for the community to share their comments, questions, and input, but to also show that it's being put to good use and that it will be visible once the study is concluded, to know that there was meaningful use of their participation throughout the process. So to wrap up, here's where we are in the timeline and the upcoming opportunities to hear more about the study. The study's community engagement team will be presenting at upcoming neighborhood council meetings, so we'll be reaching out to them. And we're planning for our final community at large meeting in mid-May, where we will be sharing the study report highlights with the community. So that's going to be a big one for all of us. There's going to be a lot of information made available at that time. We will also continue to make monthly presentations with the HICP as well, moving forward to the study phases. And we're excited to be concluding this phase. There's been a lot of hard work put in through all of our team and the community and all of you as it gets much closer to seeing the project become a reality. So thank you so much for your continued participation. And with that, I do realize we're a little strapped for time. As you all know, please, if you have any other questions or clarifications or what have you, please reach out to Heather or myself. Information provided below, and thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks again, Alex. And yeah, thanks everyone on the HICP, in the HICP membership, and particularly our community engagement steering committee members, the project team. It's been a really comprehensive effort over several years. I see Pam's comment about the community meeting being in person, the one in May. We should take that under advisement and see what the opportunity is. We've been playing it by ear as we go into these spring phases. So we'll see if there's an opportunity to do some portion of either the entirety of the meeting or some portion of a meeting in person. That's something we have discussed in the past, and I know we'd love to consider it for this final community meeting related to the feasibility study.